Men are in a box.
Yeah.
Men's options are so much narrower than women's. I can work full-time, I can work part-time, I can stay full-time with my kids, and society is fine with all of that. Society is really only fine with men being breadwinners. That has to change too. If women are going to have more power outside of the home, something has to change inside of the home that allows men to have a bit more flexibility.
So joining us now on Open Book is Katty Kay. She's the best-selling author, and she's a U.S. special correspondent for BBC News. And Katty, the book is awesome. The title of the book is The Power Code: More Joy, Less Ego, Maximum Impact for Women, but obviously maximum impact for everybody. I got so much out of your book. And, when we make decisions that are ego-based, as you reference in the book, get ourselves in trouble. Okay, one of my ego-based decisions was to work for Donald Trump, frankly. I wanted to work in the White House. I had, and even though my wife probably hated Trump more than Melania hates him and told me don't do it, I had to do it because, ego. So Let's start there. You have Claire Shipman is also your co-author. I think everybody should read this book. Okay, you say men see it as a zero-sum game in the book, which I totally agree with. Women do not see it as a zero-sum game. It's a big thesis of this book. So explain that to us if you don't mind. And welcome to Open Book.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on, Anthony, and for reading the book and for your kind words about it. Look, we looked around the world and we thought, hey, if everything was going so well, perhaps we wouldn't need to write a book about power. But I don't know, everything I've seen over the last few years in this country and in other countries made me think that things are not going so well, and perhaps we should start looking at what's happening at the top. And why are there, after all of this billions of dollars that have been spent on diversity programs and all of the efforts that have been made, only 10% of CEOs are women, less than 10% of the world's leaders are women. And, there's so much evidence that if there were more women in positions of power, then things would perhaps be run a little bit better. And we got into looking at this thing of what is power? How do you define it? And it came as a surprise to us that women and men don't see power the same. That men do have this idea of having power over things, right? The traditional idea of power that's come down to us through centuries, from Machiavelli onwards and before him as well, is that you have power. I have power over this cup because I can make it move. I have power over resources, or I have power over people. And the implication is you're making them do something that they don't want to do. It's kind of controlling, it's domineering, it's hierarchical. But according to academics who we interviewed for the book, women understand power differently. They're much more focused on the result, power to do something. What's the impact you can have with power? What's the why of power? What's the point of having power? And that distinction, I think, explains partly why there are fewer women in positions of power, because we've got this kind of clash of sensibilities, but also what we could achieve. I mean, it's like you do take the ego out of it. When you focus on the result of power, it's not about the big corner office or about your office in the Oval Office, right? Within spitting distance of Donald Trump. It's about, what can I do to make my company better? What can I do to improve the lives of my team? What can I do to make my community better or my country better? It's what can I do with power that's important.
So again, I think it's a book for everybody, not just women, because I think when I am in a collaboration mode, when I'm thinking about we and not me versus them, like I know right away when I'm talking to somebody says to me, oh, that person works for me, I know we're going to get into trouble, right? Because at Skybridge, people work with me. Right. Even though I run the company, they don't work for me. See the distinction? Yeah. But guys get crazy with that sort of stuff. And Margaret Thatcher said in Downing Street years, she wrote in the first volume of her memoirs, that men were more vain than women. She, contrary to what you would think from the stereotype, she found that the members of parliament she interacted with, they were more vain. So not only were they more egocentric, they were more vain. Do you believe that? You think men are more vain than women?
Yeah, I mean, that's so interesting. I mean, because that is about ego, isn't it? I mean, in a way, vanity is ego. It's like, how does the world perceive me? Do I have enough of the trappings that make me look, powerful? Do I have the big office, or, the big paycheck, or, the team? Do I have a big team under me? And one of the things that got us into writing this book about power was a study that came out of Harvard a couple of years ago that showed that women don't want power. Right? However you define it, women just don't want it. We look at it and we think the cost of getting it is too high. we have to give up too many other things that we want to do in order to get power, but also that power itself is kind of unappealing. And I think that's that vanity element that you're talking about. Is like, why would I give up time with my community, with my family, with my elderly parents, with my friends, to go for, the time I spend on exercise, all of those life values that women have more of than men, according to our research. Why would I give them up to do this, to get this thing that actually, when I get there, it's a lot of mansplaining and egocentricity, and I just don't think I'm going to be able to have much impact with us. And that disturbed us, because if women don't want power, but we think the world would be better off when they have power, when women have power, we have to think about power. It's not really about changing women, it's about changing power.
My grandmother had a great line about all this. She believed that men, for whatever reason, see themselves as immortal, and even though they're not. You know what I mean? You may remember the movie Moonstruck. Olympia Dukakis said, well, why the hell is Dad having a share? Said, why is Dad having that affair? Well, he thinks the young girl is going to make him live forever. You see what I mean? So there's an egocentrism to the whole thing, which I thought was brilliant. We interviewed Robert Greene, who wrote the best-selling book, 48 Laws of Power. It's coming up on its 25th anniversary, and so he's a friend of mine. I brought him on Open Book, and he said something to me. I want to test it on you. I want to get your reaction. He said that, we front ourselves is that we're not like everybody else. We're better. We're better. We have the better angels of human nature, are inspirited in ourselves. It's the other people that are weak and have warped values and so on and so forth. And we present ourselves to the world as being better. But the truth is we're not. We're all roughly the same. We have good and bad in us. And there's this, what Hermann Hesse called it in the book Damien, was the abraxas. There's good and bad in all of us. We try to pretend that there isn't. Do you believe that, Katty? Do you believe what Robert Greene said?
Yeah, I think that's kind of right. I also think we're all sort of average, right? I mean, the idea that I think we go around with this idea that I'm a superstar, I'm better than other people, whether it's morally or professionally. And then actually that gets us into trouble, because we hold ourselves to this standard of having to be constantly the best.
Yes.
And just by the law of averages, right, Anthony? I mean, we cannot all be the best. I mean, it's just, math doesn't work like that. Most of us are just kind of average, and we're kind of muddling through. And I think in a way, particularly, for women who tend to be more perfectionist by nature, according to our research, than men, in a way, recognizing that can almost be sort of liberating. Because if we recognize that we have good and bad in us, it's going to make us more forgiving of other people, and realizing that those weaknesses they have, we have too, right? It's not just you who might have screwed up. I've screwed up as well. Everybody I know has screwed up. But in a way, I think that's sort of liberating. And I think it helps us see people more holistically. One of the things we talked about with power is some of the female leaders we spoke to. One of them had this great idea about you bring your whole self to work, right? People don't leave home in the morning and pop into a phone booth and put on a Superman cape and turn up at the office, even at your office. The person who turns up at your office in the morning, Anthony, is the same person that got out of bed in the morning with all of their foibles and weaknesses and insecurities and problems in their life, whether they are financial or whatever it is, personal. And in a way, if you can accept that and embrace that as a leader, I think it can make your organization work better and have more impact.
I know, it's very well said, and it's all packed into this book. A couple of things I want to go over, because you're mentioning these women. You interviewed Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern.
No, we didn't. We referenced her, but we wanted to interview her, but she was right in the middle of.
I'm sorry. Was it one of them? Who did you interview? You interviewed one of these women.
We interviewed a lot of women. We interviewed the first female.
It was a recent one. I remember reading in the book there was a recent leader that you interviewed that I was very impressed with. We interviewed
a woman actually in Senegal who's a leader there. I don't know if that's who you're thinking of.
That's who it was. Tell us about her.
She's so interesting. So we wanted to test the idea of whether power too, when you put it into play out in the real world rather than just in the academic world, actually has an impact. And I was living in Senegal. I kind of took a break in the middle of the Trump campaign. You might understand why I needed to do that, actually, Anthony.
You need a mental health break. Dealing with mental illness, you need a mental health break.
You could have come and joined me. It might have been good for you. Anyway, I went out to Senegal, which is an interesting country because they instituted a law about 10 years ago that meant that any political party that ran for office had to have 50% of its candidates being women. Otherwise, you couldn't run. And suddenly, overnight, a whole load of women went into office, and I interviewed one of them. And I asked her, what does power mean to you? What is it as an idea? And she said, power is the ability to get an electric light into a maternity clinic in a rural area so that the midwife can help a woman give birth with a little bit of electricity.
Very interesting.
Power is getting toilets for girls into schools so they can still go to school when they're having their periods rather than having to stay home. And I just thought, this idea of power as a tool, take out the ego. That is power to change lives. It's an electric light bulb. It's separate toilets for girls. It's about making people's lives better. And I just thought that for me, that was a sort of such an inspirational way of seeing power. It's a tool. It's neutral. You use it for good or for bad. It's a service.
Well, as you write in the book, it's a service-based, service centrism, as opposed to how does this make me look?
Right.
I'm sitting in the corner office, so I am the man. Okay, and let me tell you how many people work for me. The woman's sitting there saying, okay, I got this office, big deal. What do I got to do now? What's my responsibilities? How do I bear my responsibilities? Talk a little bit about the home power dynamic, okay? About the high-earning woman, she ends up doing more housework than the unemployed man. Isn't
that crazy? Isn't that crazy, but you kind of know it's true?
Well, I know it's true. I haven't lifted a finger. I mean, my mother used to iron my boxer shorts when I was a kid, okay?
My sons
I know we're in this like woke culture now, and I'm supposed to be this like women's liberal and stuff like that. But if your mother's ironing your boxer shorts and you grew up in this Italian patriarchy, what do you want me to do? How do you want me to act?
Yeah, like my husband's dad, who was born in 1914, right, on the eve of the First World War, he wouldn't have known a play date or a lunchbox if it had hit him on the head. He wouldn't have known what a diaper was, right? He didn't have any engagement. So my husband has no role model in his life for organizing play dates, doing the housework, because his dad never did any of that.
Yeah, well,
his mom did it all. And I think that's...
I haven't met your husband, Caddy. I already like him, okay? I already like him.
Yeah, except that then he comes along and marries me and suddenly it's going to shape up. But look, so this was just wonderful, that a man in America who doesn't have a job does less housework than a woman who has a full-time job.
And let me ask you this, though, and this is a very honest question, though. Do you feel that sometimes men who have high-powered, high-earning women feel emasculated, that smashes their ego?
So true. I mean, look, it's not just that I feel it. The data is there on this. That couples where the wife earns more than the husband are more likely to get divorced than couples where the husband earns more than the wife. We found in our book this amazing research that a third of American women now earn more than their husbands.
Right.
And the number is growing every year. But in couples where the wife earns more, guess what they do? They lie about it on the US Census form. Because they want to make their marriage look like a so-called traditional marriage.
Right.
They're kind of protecting the guy's ego by saying, he actually earns more than I do. They'll go so far as to lie on a government document in order to kind of maintain this idea. But actually, you know what we concluded from that? First of all, it's crazy, obviously, and it's sad. And we interviewed a guy who quit work and his wife became the primary breadwinner. And he told us that he felt he had failed at the one thing he was meant to achieve, which was being the breadwinner in the family. And we just thought, how sad is that? I mean, actually, the conclusion of this is that men are in a box. Men's options are so much narrower than women's. I can work full-time. I can work part-time. I can stay full-time with my kids. And society is fine with all of that. Society is really only fine with men being breadwinners. Yeah. And I think that has to change too. If women are going to have more power outside of the home, something has to change inside of the home that allows men to have a bit more flexibility.
But, our brains are not that evolved. Okay, so if you really study the brain, it's not that evolved. You have the cortex and then so you're laughing because I'm right about this. The neocortex is literally the size of 6 playing cards. And that's where all the consciousness is. And so the atavism that a man has is quite primordial. He has to be the breadwinner. He's protecting the cave. He's out there hunting. The woman is gathering. people could be mad at me for saying this, but this is why we've evolved the way we've evolved. And now we're becoming more enlightened and we're making more of a transformation. And now because of our society, we're able to be more equal. But women, Caddy, didn't get the right to vote in the United States until 1/5 of the 20th century was over. Yeah. And then they got the right to vote in the United States. So I think we've made a lot of progress. Am I wrong in saying that? Or no, I know it's not perfect, and I know we haven't gotten to where we should be in terms of where a normative standard would be in a society. But have we made a lot of progress, or am I wrong in saying that?
I'm just wondering if it's the wine bottles and the whiskey bottles that are right over your shoulder that might mean your brain is not working as well as it could be.
Yeah, so you'll notice, though. And
I like that. I like that.
These are all gifts. You'll see they're not open because I actually don't drink.
Oh, a shame. I wish I was with you.
And you shouldn't trust people that don't drink, so I drink a little. You shouldn't ever trust anybody that doesn't drink.
You're Italian, for Italian origin.
I'm Italian, but the problem is I just don't like the way it makes me feel. So I don't drink. I drink. If you and I were out to dinner, I'm going to have a drink, but I'm not a teetotaler, but I'm not a big drinker. So all these things are gifts. They're like laying around in here. And I hand them out to me. I just got that actually. It's actually some kind of Swiss drink or something.
Nice.
But go to what I said. Do you think I'm right about this? That we've had some progress?
It's one, half a dozen of one.
Does your husband know how to do play dates, or is he?
Yeah. See that? I started earning
progress.
It's
progress.
It's totally progress. And so when I started earning more than my husband a kind of few years ago, and I write about it in the book, we had to have some pretty tricky conversations about. He had to help more in the house, or my travel schedule might have to take, priority because I was the one that was bringing in more money. And they weren't the easiest of conversations to have, even, in a household like mine, where he's been used to me working. And it has kind of changed the dynamic. And I remember actually, but women have to do something here too, right? We have to give up some control over this. Mm-hmm. We have to cede some of our domain here, because I remember when my kid's school started putting him as the kind of primary contact to call if there was an emergency at school. And I remember the first time I realized that was happening, feeling sort of displaced, feeling like my role as a mother and feeling kind of guilty. And then I thought, actually, this is exactly what needs to happen. I have to be able to cede some of that stuff at home in order for me to be able to carry on doing
what I love about that is what you're saying is so brutally honest, And by the way, because I follow you on Twitter, now known as X. I mean, you've had some, and I hope your mom and dad are still alive. You have some beautiful pictures of your mom and dad that you've showed.
They died actually during COVID, but that's very sweet of you.
Oh, is that right? But I do remember you sitting at a table with them, and you could see their pride in you. And I'm like, all right, this is like a cool family. So but implied in that is that there's some levels of traditionalism that even you, as a very powerful woman, you're just describing it in terms of your displacement, you have to also go through some cognitive awareness and adjustment, right?
I think so. And I think we also have to be, rather than just getting mad that men aren't picking up the vacuum cleaner enough, I think we have to have some empathy. Women have to have more empathy about this kind of narrow box that men are in. I mean, I think of my husband as a sort of sandwich generation. He came from this background where his dad didn't do any of this stuff. Mm-hmm. And he's got no role model. And yet suddenly everybody's giving him a hard time if he doesn't do 50% of the housework.
Amen.
But look at the change he's gone through, right? He does pick up our kids from school. He does help with homework. He does organize play dates. And it's easy to focus on all of the stuff that husbands and men aren't doing. We document them in the book. And it'd be great if they step up. But also think how hard it is, that his brain, sometimes I can see it working like, hold on a second, I'm not doing enough, but my dad didn't do any of this. What's my role here? I get a hard time if I'm not a full-time dad, but I also get a hard time if I'm not a full-time breadwinner, right? We have to figure that out.
Yeah, no, listen, this is why the book is so interesting. I think the book is relevant to men and women.
You were talking about brain. By the way, you're talking about brains. Did you know that we did a whole chapter on the impact of power on your brains? That
was my next question about power and neuroscience.
It's super cool.
Yeah, so tell us about that, power and neuroscience.
So you were talking about brains and cortexes earlier. What the neuroscientists have found is that people who have power, literally the behavioral activation system in their brain lights up. So power encourages us to take action. which also means that people who have power are more likely to succeed, because we succeed when we do things. People who don't have power, the behavioral activation system kind of shuts down. They're far more passive, far more reticent, less likely to take action. So if you don't have power, you're not likely to succeed, which also, by the way, is why we want the people who have power to be the right people, right? I mean, you know this from your world in politics.
Yeah.
It's all the more reason that that old phrase about power, that power tends to corrupt, and absolute
Lord Acton,
power, Lord Acton, who probably didn't have very many powerful women around to base his research on. But actually, we also found that women who have power do not get corrupted by it. Power tends to corrupt men, but not women. Women who have power are up to 80% less likely to be charged with acts.
More willing to give it up, though, too. Shakespeare didn't write about the women protagonists that were fearful of giving up their power. He wrote about the men that wanted to live forever and not give up their power. But I agree with that. But let me test this on you, because I think this is also relevant. In the Federalist Papers, Hamilton was emphatic about this, and he wrote it anonymously, at least at the time, that men can't handle power. And the reason why we needed to have this diffuse system and the checks and balances, that we actually just can't handle the power, because it does what Acton says. It absolutely corrupts, and it leads to cronyism, and it leads to a split in the society. And by diffusing the power, you make the people more powerful, and you give the people more opportunity. And I think I don't know, what's your reaction to that? Because I feel we're at a point in America now where people, okay, let's give up the democracy. It'll make things more efficient. And by the way, it may for 10 years. Mussolini got the trains to run on time.
Right.
And the Italians were very happy about that. But then the cronyism comes in, and the power craziness happens. And then lo and behold, you have these two-tier systems that crop up. And you get really, really poor people and a few tiny rich people at the top.
Well, I mean, look at China right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have the Chinese economy that's doing badly. The kind of whole social media trend in China at the moment is young Chinese hashtag, they're just going to go and lie down because they feel so apathetic because there are no jobs for them. And what's happened is that Xi Jinping has consolidated power in his own hands. And when you do that, and there's sometimes a risk, I think, of presidents in the United States doing that, of surrounding themselves with yes men and never wanting to hear the bad news. And it's unsustainable as both a political and an economic system. So the economic consequences of Xi Jinping consolidating power have led, I think, to the situation that we're in at the moment, where you have lower growth in China than was projected, just because
100%.
The best decisions are not being made.
But he's also scaring everybody, because if you get on the wrong side of him, remember, that's what happens in a totalitarian regime. I'm a business leader. I think I'm making the right decision for my company, but I'm now on the wrong side of the autocrat, and I disappear, or I'm taken to a re-education camp, or I'm told, and then all of a sudden,
I'm a doctor trying to say there's COVID, there's a pandemic coming.
Yeah. So, I mean, listen, more than one cabinet member of the Donald Trump administration has sat in this room, my office, and said to me emphatically that Trump's tweeting froze them, that they were not able to work more closely together for fear if they had done something that he didn't like, he was going to send out a career-ruining tweet. I mean, there's people like me where he's tweeting about I could care less because I'm a New Yorker. But some of these sensitive bureaucrats, they get upset about it, right? And so they stopped working together. You see, and that's a thin membrane of totalitarianism. But you get the point I'm making. This is in the neuroscience, though, am I right? There's the brain is not set up, a male brain, not super set up for lots of power, right? It goes wrong for the man. No?
Well, I think this idea that we have in our research of men there was a big study done of Fortune 500 companies showing that when men get to the top of organizations, they lose their connection and empathy for those lower down the organizations.
Right.
They stop seeing the problems in the organization as well. That's another thing that happens. So you start putting on rose-tinted glasses. Men start putting on rose-tinted glasses and start thinking that their organization is kind of perfect.
Right.
Maybe because they've got to the top, and so they think any organization that they're at the top at must be perfect.
And by the way, I'm right about everything, so I can run a sports team I can manage money. I'm right about everything. That's the other thing that
I don't want to be challenged. And I don't want to remember the people who are at the bottom who are not rising up.
I think it's another good point.
And it's interesting that it doesn't happen to women. So women rise up to the C-suite and they don't see the world around them in their corporation with rose-tinted glasses, and they do retain their connection and their empathy to those who are starting out and are at the bottom of the tree. And I think that's a kind of interesting dynamic. It's another example of this. And I think it's why there are now a dozen studies that show, global studies, the IMF, the European Union, Goldman Sachs, Columbia Universities, that companies that employ more women in senior positions make more money than their competitors.
It's interesting. I mean, it's well said. All right, so I'm at the stage in our podcast where I have 5 words. We come up with 5 words for our authors, and you could give me a sentence. You could give me a word. I'm going to say the word. I want you to think of something about the word that you think of, and they're all obviously tied to your book. So let's start with the word control. Caddy, control.
Ego.
There you go. Okay, growth.
The ability to see that you're not good at everything, but you can be.
But also the control of ego, weirdly, right? Right. Yeah, right. Exactly. Okay. Female.
Better leaders.
Yeah, it's interesting. Male.
In a box.
Power.
The ability to have an impact and to give us joy. I think that is something that women often forget because they find power kind of intimidating, but that actually there is incredible satisfaction in having an impact and making people's lives better. I mean, that Senegalese politician I interviewed, she was making lives better. And who doesn't want to do that?
So, many years ago, I had President Clinton at one of my conferences. He had just gotten back from North Korea. He had helped secure the release of, I think, a couple of Americans that were erroneously in North Korea. And I asked him on stage, I said, so have you done better things for the world as an ex-president, or did you do more for the world as a president? And he said something to me that I'll never forget. He said, Anthony, with a stroke of the pen, I had executive power where if we wanted to put malaria nets in Africa and it cost us $900 million to do that, I stroked a pen, and through USAID, we saved 3.6 million lives from malaria. The Clinton Foundation, I'd have to work for 50 years to raise $900 million. And so the point being is if you have the power and you use it wisely, it is a force for joy and it is a force for good.
I love that story, Anthony. And I wish all, the women who look at power and think it's too hard to get there, I have to make too many compromises and I won't, I'll have to deal with kind of egos when I get there. I want them to hear that story because we need more women at the top, and women need to realize that power can be an incredible source of satisfaction.
Well, I love the book. The title of the book is The Power Code: More Joy, Less Ego, Maximum Impact for Women and Everyone. Caddy K, thank you so much for joining me today on Open Book. I really enjoyed it.
Anthony, that was great.
So joining us now is Jim Campbell. He's a radio host and author. The book is called Madoff Talks: Uncovering the Untold Story Behind the Most Notorious Ponzi Scheme in History. Jim, welcome to the show. But what a fascinating book. I just want to start with your interest in Madoff. I mean, you've had such a great career. What gravitated you towards Madoff? And tell us why you wanted to dig into this particular story.
Okay. First off, it's an honor to be on your show. We are both Tufts graduates, I have found out, so which is a great link there. And you're a fund to funds guy, and of course the feeder funds were at the heart of the let's say abrogation of due diligence. When it comes to Bernie, a lot of it was fortuitous because I was doing an interview with Lori Sandell, who wrote a book on the Madoff family side only. And out of the blue, she says, well, Jim, your show's live. Do you want to talk off the record with Andy Madoff the day before? So I call Andy. I jump all over him from the start and found him disarmingly honest. And he said he was going to listen to the show to see if he heard the same kind of stuff out of me. And then fortuitous number 2, his mom is Ruth Madoff is moving to Greenwich from Florida. and I live in Greenwich. So I said, I'll take her out to lunch. Probably no one else will. And we met in a restaurant in December. She had sunglasses on, wouldn't take them off until later, ate a chef salad like she hadn't eaten. And again, we hit it off. And she said she was going to contact Bernie and tell Bernie to talk to me. So Bernie says, I'll talk to you. I said, Bernie, I'm going to vet single thing you say. He says, Jim, I'm going to accept that. And the next thing we know, we had 400 pages of communications. Why I was interested in three things. One, getting inside his mind, which is unfathomable. Number two, the Justice Department, the FBI, the bankruptcy trustee all thought Andy, Mark, and Ruth had to know. I wanted to do my own independent investigation, and I came up with a different answer. And thirdly, the untold story that hadn't been put together was the failure of the architecture of the regulatory system, from the SEC to SIPC to Wall Street. And I tried to build that all into one story. And let me just put one more plug in. The Netflix docuseries, Madoff, the Monster of Wall Street, is running. Joe Berlinger's the #1 true crime director for Netflix, did a superb job, very honest linkage directly to the book. And it must have been good because Jamie Dimon called me the day after it premiered.
Well, listen, I watched the documentary. I read the book. I found everything in the thing fascinating. And for me, it's like a great coroner's report. And I think, and I'm gonna applaud you for a second because you make all of us safer. After reading your book, I installed a few additional safeguards at Skybridge, and I want to test a theory on you, get your reaction. It felt like the Madoff crime was a close-knit crime. It was himself, perhaps his brother, an accountant, his assistant. And I really believe that the way you commit a crime, Jim, is with a closed net. If you've got 50 or 60 people working on it, there's always a person of conscience that says, hey, this isn't for me. I'm going to the feds or I'm going to do X, Y, Z. And so at Skybridge, I've got JP Morgan as my bank. I've got Pershing as my other, like clearing person, if you will. KPMG does our audits. So you've got 100 different people before a key can get turned or money can get released. There's enough people in the mix where a crime can't be committed. That was one of the big things that came out of the book for me. You don't think they were involved. I don't either, by the way, which is I find there's a difference with the FBI. I guess they think everybody's a criminal. But I want to ask you this question because when I closed your book, I was like, how the hell did Jim Campbell get these people to open up the way they did? I mean, they disclosed new information to you, Jim. How did you get that done? It's not just the chef salad and your smile. Something else happened.
Yeah, that's a great question. In fact, Bill Cohen, who wrote a blurb for the cover, said the same thing. How did I get these guys to talk? And, I guess I come across as objective, that I'm going to tell the story as I see it based on facts. I'm going to verify facts. And other than that, I have a hard time understanding because you got to remember, none of these, Bernie, Ruth, Andy, didn't know me from dirt. I came out of the blue. And none of them saw the book or any conclusions until the Sunday morning news, CBS Sunday Morning. I was on that. That was the first time they heard anything. They were all watching. And so it is hard to understand why Bernie would open them. Now, you said these things are closed. It was very closed-knit. But the thing is, Bernie's mind is so compartmentalized that he kept everybody else in silos. So he's the only guy that even saw the overall perspective. And he never would have admitted to his family that he had to turn to a criminal enterprise to save his firm. And remember, he ran a wholesale trading firm that executed trades for discount brokers primarily. It was worth $3 billion of its own without any Ponzi scheme. And everybody on the 19th floor was honest and good. And then on the 17th floor was high school graduates who enabled the thing for 40 years and never even figured out it was a Ponzi scheme.
Yeah, no, I felt like you had a Oriental rug and that, chestnut walnut on the 19th floor, but then you had this like laundry facility for the narcos,
Yeah.
crime cartel.
Yes.
and the dichotomy was sort of bizarre. So tell us about Bernie Madoff, sociopath, accidental villain. Did he slip into it and then become evil? What happened in your mind? What were the revelations?
Yeah, that's another great question. Bernie gave me this intricate story that he hadn't really told publicly because of the fact he thought it was too complex. That he was running this purely legitimate business, and just like a gambler, took a loss and made the moral mistake and legal mistake of doubling down on it. No one will notice I run a little Ponzi. We'll catch up, and bingo, it'll go away. Which of course never happens, just like it doesn't happen in gambling. And, sociopath, he had a lack of empathy. In fact, he would start off and say, I'd say, Bernie, what is your remorse on this? And he'd say, well, my lawyers tell me I have to have remorse. And I said, well, that's not the best way, Bernie, to express remorse. So obviously there were signs of that. Berlinger said there were similarities to serial killers because he'd done Ted Bundy, a thing on Whitey Bulger, as well as Jeffrey Epstein. But the thing is that what happened is the wholesale trading business fit his psychology perfectly. Transaction-based commissions, if the market is up or down, control costs, leading edge in technology, and hire good people. The other business involved making trades where you could lose money, and he psychically could not accept any loss. And as you know, his fund went up every single month forever. And rather than say, this business of money management isn't for me, he basically doubled down on it. But here's the other thing is, as you said, that he slipped into this. That's what he was trying to convey. But once I looked at it, he ran both businesses side by side from the same time, which is really what's unfathomable.
Well, I want to set the scene for you because this man was so respected, Jim.
Yes.
When I joined Goldman Sachs, I was in the private client area. And so my task was to go out and meet high net worth individuals, ask them to open accounts with Goldman. And I was running into people that said, well, I want to do 1% a month. Will you be able to do 1% a month for me like Bernie Madoff? And I'm like, no, actually, I don't think we could do that. Well, you know what? I don't have any interest in you. I remember going back to my manager and saying, who the hell is Bernie Madoff? And how is he doing 1% a month? And people can pretend otherwise, sir. It was a fait accompli that he had new sauce, a newfangled thinking. He had a strategy that was revered. No one. It was very few people. I know a few guys at the end, like Harry Markopoulos, and those guys got the wind of it. But remember, he had SEC audits. He thought he was cooked in 2005. And the SEC says, no, this is good. Thank you. We'll see you in a couple of years. So what was it? What was it about the Bernie Madoff aura? Everybody revises history now, Jim. Oh, I knew he was a crook. I did not know he was a crook. I met him 3 times. The only reason why I didn't invest with him is I didn't understand what he was doing. And so I had that cardinal rule for me. Trust me, I've lost money with other people, Jim. Okay, I'm not saying it that way, but what was it? What was his patina? What was his secret sauce?
And you're right. He had tremendous respect. And of course, I said, Bernie, the reason you're such a good con man is you're the anti-con. He was behind a curtain on the 17th floor. You couldn't really talk to him directly. He didn't allow due diligence, and he just produced these results. And this split strike conversion strategy, very opaque. I never found any of his clients or even on the 19th floor traders who understood it. And yet it was highly simple. It should have mirrored the overall indexes, right? Which, of course, right away tells you it's infeasible because you can't just, go straight up. The SEC never had the right people looking at his books. They kept having, because they were separate silos for money management, asset management, and broker-dealer. And they kept having only broker-dealer guys on who thought he was front-running, right? That was the rumor why he wasn't losing money. But he not only was never trading through his own firm, he was never trading at all. And sort of like SBF, he built this great scheme of credibility. SBF kind of bought it by giving donations and hiring, ex guys out of the CFTC. Bernie did it through a combination of, he architected the NASDAQ, and then he was chairman. And the SEC used to actually go to him to ask him what was going on at a firm like Goldman or Salomon if they didn't understand what was going on, and he would help translate it for them. Also, he didn't cheat. He never cheated his customers on the legitimate side of the business. He was one of the founders of payment for order flow, right? Which a lot of people say Robinhood abused, for instance. But he didn't abuse it. He gave that rebate back, but he gave them best price execution, even above the public market displays. So he had a tremendous image, and he was also a bully. He ran the firm like a family, which they loved, or he bullied you, or he paid you with golden handcuffs, overpaying these guys that were administrative high school graduates downstairs. $700,000 is what Annette Bongiorno was making when she retired with a $58 million fake IRA, and she had no education, basically.
Yeah, I mean, look, but I mean, that's what he did. He sucked them in. They were very loyal to him, and they were helping him perpetrate this crime. He also had like an accountant across the Tappan Zee Bridge. Nobody really knew. People were okay with that because he was Bernie Madoff. Joe Berlinger, let's talk about him for a second. I saw an interview of Joe's on CNBC where he told Andrew Ross Sorkin he felt that the people that invested in Bernie's business knew he was a fraud, but they did it anyway because they wanted to get those returns, and a result of which they were like, hey, I don't care if the guy's a fraud. He's making me money. It's good for me. Do you believe that? Do you believe that people...
I believe you can break it into three categories. One is people who definitely knew he was doing illegal stuff. They didn't know Ponzi scheme. And the big four fit under there, Jeffrey Pickauer and those folks. The feeders, a lot of them, Fairfield Greenwich, had to have known the results weren't real, okay? The second group is, well, we think he's a crook. He's our crook. He's probably front running, but so what? We'll let it go. And then the third group are completely innocent, many of them of moderate net worth, who had been with him for 40 years and were completely clueless. So it kind of co-conspirators to willfully blind to innocent completely.
I don't want to give away the book because the book is just too good. But I got to ask these questions just to make our podcast interesting. Okay.
Sure.
Help me understand his lawyers, J.P. Morgan Chase. Help me understand the web of service providers around him. How could they have not tripped the switch somewhere?
Yeah, J.P. Morgan, and as I said, I'm a fan of Jamie Dimon, and he was very nice on the phone. He let me basically interrupt him and tell him he didn't have his information, but great guy. And I counted at least 6 divisions at J.P. Morgan who interfaced with Bernie, several of which knew something wasn't right. And there was they maintained there was no horizontal way to connect J.P. Morgan back then, and I give them that to a certain extent. But when the UK Madoff finally went to the UK Financial Authority because they were being threatened by the Colombian drug lords on the Bank Medici FEMA fund, they didn't bother to tell the SEC in the US or the divisions. And there were divisions like Private Wealth that were bragging that they hadn't got sucked into Bernie, but didn't tell their clients that, And of course, the basic thing, the 703 account, $170 billion went through that account, and JP Morgan was told it was an operating expense account, which is ridiculous. 1 month before it went down, they thought it was the market-making account, which had been at Bank of America for 30 years. So there should have been, and the other thing, they're the only people that could view his account, right? There should have been, it was an equity strategy. There should have been $4.4 billion of dividends deposited. There should have been counterparty payments either way. And there was never $1 of dividend deposited and never $1 of counterparty transactions in that account. So yeah, it should have been widely open. The SEC missed 5 separate investigations, even when they caught him in contradictory statements and lies, et cetera. So it's hard not to blame. And the feeders, the feeders knew he wasn't doing the strategy in the case of some of them.
Jim, the sins of the father. Did he kill his sons?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, Andy worded it this way: he killed my brother quickly, and he's killing me slowly. As you know, Andrew died in 2014, I believe, of leukemia that had recurred, and Mark committed suicide. And you know, it's an unbelievable story. Eleanor Squillieri driving home that very first night in a car to Staten Island. Her daughter calls her in the car and says, you know, she'd worked with in the front office as interns in the summer during their high school years, so she knew the boys. And Bernie's only been arrested for about 3 hours, and she tells her mother, "I know Mark. He's not going to be able to handle this. He's going to commit suicide." And he did, you know, 2 years to the day of Bernie's arrest. A lot of people thought that might be a consciousness of guilt. No, it wasn't. It was that he couldn't deal with it. They were betrayed. He had a much more fragile ego. Andy was very tough.
But I mean, again, I'm not a psychologist, but I think there had to be some layers of depression in there on top of the calamity that his father perpetrated. Andy, of course, had leukemia. The stress probably of the whole situation contributed to that relapse. What can you tell us about Ruth Madoff?
Yeah. Ruth was almost cult-like devoted to Bernie. So she believed basically everything. And in fact, even after it happened, he was BSing her. And the boys were really saying, you know, you got to cut contact with her or we're not going to have much to do with you. She was a very attractive, smart woman. And, you know, she probably played a little bit more ignorant with me than she really is. But she did not know, she lived with her sister in Florida for a while. They were wiped out. So she and the husband were driving a limo to the airport as a service and to survive. And obviously they wouldn't have had Ruth with them. She trusted me completely. We texted all the time. And, you know, I would tell her, you know, I was talking to this person. They can't believe you didn't know. And, you know, she would respond to that. And she was just a very interesting person. After the book went to McGraw-Hill, she said that she didn't want to talk anymore. I think part of that was because they were trying to get early compassionate release from Bernie. So the press, you know, this wouldn't have been a good thing. As I say, I gave her the book, so she has it. I don't know what she thought of it, but, you know, the fact that she totally trusted me and asked for no editorial content. In fact, you know, as I said, I could have found that they were complicit. In fact, it went right down to the edge for me to find out confidently that they weren't. I had to find a deep throat inside Madoff to verify what I thought. You know, the bankruptcy trustee thought these $800 million of losses that Bernie covered by laundering money from 17 to 19 was due to trading losses. It never made sense to me that a small proprietary group would have been kept going with 800 million of losses. And of course, it wasn't trading losses. But I had to verify that before I could be comfortable. And as I said, they're culpable on a moral basis, just as the SEC is. They took a lot of money out of there. And, you know, they have to be accountable. Ruth signed the tax returns. The tax returns were totally phony by that guy in the strip mall that you're talking about.
What was the most surprising thing you learned, Jim?
The most surprising thing, I think, was Bernie's mind, and coupled with the complete failure of the regulatory system and on Wall Street. I don't think anybody realizes. We haven't talked about how SIPC failed, and it's just how, you know, FINRA failed, the SEC failed, the feeder funds, the banks, the bankruptcy trustee then completely abused his power, if you ask me. And it's almost mind-boggling how the whole story hangs together like that. And of course, you know, the fact that I found differently than the entire spectrum of the investigative bodies and the public on whether they knew or not. You know, so those were all surprises, I think. But, you know, Bernie's, you know, is just a unique entity of himself. And he pulled this off for 40 years. And it really unbelievable. As you know, Ponzi schemes by definition cannot last, and they generally cannot last long.
FTX. Let's talk about that.
Sure.
You may know this. I mean, I liked Sam. I trusted Sam. I
Yeah.
ended up selling a piece of my business to Sam. I guess the good news is he gave me the money, Jim. I didn't give him the money.
Right.
But and I admired Sam's parents, particularly his dad. I got very close to his dad.
Mm-hmm.
What's your reaction to the FTX story?
Yeah, my reaction to that is, first off, I found it very interesting that he and Bernie, as two different entities, Bernie looking like a Wall Street guy and SBF purposely not, but they both built reputations of credibility. Nobody in the crypto communities ever said, I support regulation, and he presented that. And the thing about SBF that bothers me is basically his story is the dog ate my homework. Didn't know what I was doing. We had no accounting system. I didn't, and meanwhile, not only did he have all these conflict of interest things with the hedge fund Alameda, right, that his girlfriend was running who didn't know anything. But if the dog ate his homework, this is one hell of a smart dog. He had 1.3 billion that he borrowed against that, and they programmed it so that he would not be billed interest on top of that was accruing. Now, how does that happen without some degree of culpability? Having no systems in place. And again, now, similar to Madoff, I got to blame the institutions for a failure of due diligence, right? I mean, not talking about you necessarily, but Sequoia, BlackRock, all of those firms were basically vouching for the guy. So we have the same failure of due diligence we had before. We had the same building of sort of a false credibility. And a Ponzi scheme involves no real trading, right? But there was real trading in crypto, but the FTT token, which had to remain stable, right? Because all the loans on the money they'd absconded with as collateral had to stay consistent. I'm assuming there's got to be, and the SEC said that, some manipulation of the market to keep that FTT token. So, Sam seemed like a great guy. You say, his parents and everything, but the actions seem to be criminal in nature, above and beyond the dog eating his homework.
Well, listen, I mean, and again, he had the reason everybody got bamboozled. If you went into his data room, he had probably one of the more pristine data rooms. Moreover, like Bernie Madoff, there was some legitimacy going on. I spent 48 hours in the Bahamas, 24 of them, 12 hours a day, okay, on the trading desk, watching his activity, looking at flows, looking at data coming through the servers. He had 12.5% of the cryptocurrency markets from an exchange point of view. So I mean, what he blew, Jim, is absolutely catastrophic and tragic. I mean, ultimately, like Madoff, he had an ego where he didn't want to, quote unquote, lose money. So he borrowed the money from his clients to make up for his losses. Had he just said, hey, I've lost money, I'm taking an XYZ loss, he had a very legitimate trading business going on.
It's funny you tell me that, because Madoff downstairs had a very intricate, phony. He set up a screen that was, he said, live contact, right, with the DTC, where all the clearing goes on. And he says, I'll show you the inventory of my stocks. Pick one out. And the guy would say, okay, Apple. And then De Pascali was in another room, right, typing it into the screen. And that bamboozled people too. And of course, as you know, upstairs he did have completely legitimate systems. Every trade could be proven to clear through the DTC. 17th floor never had a trade go through the DTC. It is interesting, and they both play this sort of good guy, innocent type of thing as well, which to me makes them look like worse sociopaths, to be honest.
I agree with you. What does this say? If it says anything, but I'd like your opinion. What does it say about the culture on Wall Street?
I'm a big fan of Wall Street. A lot of brilliant people, a lot of good work done. So I'm not, some kind of crusading and anti-Wall Street guy. I'm critical of the business conflicts of interest, right? Where the customer gets screwed. I'm critical of there's sort of an unwritten omerta because I kept asking, what Merrill and Goldman, for instance, said, we're not trading with this guy. Something's up. But they didn't tell anybody that, and they didn't tell clients. They didn't tell the SEC, and that kind of bothers me. And of course, the feeder funds, an absolute disgrace. Bernie passed on those fees to them, which means we have to give up all our due diligence, which is our only job, right? Administering and picking out funds that match risk profiles. And, so how can you not be, critical of that? Then you get to SBX years later, right? And the system failed again, basically. There is no crypto regulation. But, when this book came out, I said SPACs, which were a good innovation initially, crypto, Robinhood, all were going to blow up. And I was just saying that, right? And I'm not a regulatory guy. And, after all the years, every one of them blew up because the SEC is not a cop on the beat. It comes in afterwards to clean up messes. It's a cultural thing by the way they're set up.
Okay, so we're down to the point of my podcast where I come up with 5 words, Jim, and then you can react to these 5 words. You can give me a sentence, a paragraph, or just a word.
Okay.
What comes to mind, okay? So the first word I want to give you is Ponzi. When I say Ponzi, what do you think of?
I say fake investment activity and makes people that are non-sophisticated highly susceptible. There is no such thing as a market-rated business that you can predict the rate of return, and Bernie would give that out on January 1, as you know.
Yeah, I mean, I say when I hear Ponzi, I think too good to be true, right? And that was probably, in hindsight, the FTX and the Madoff story. I want to go back to Wall Street. When I say Wall Street, what do you think of?
I think of the banks. I think of the folks on it, and both on the commercial bank side and on the investment banking side. And I think of basically a financial intermediary role. And I'm just a critic of business models that are in conflict. Robinhood's business model, payment for order flow, was screwing their clients, for instance.
Yes. Yeah, well, it's interesting because the best part of Wall Street is it's the arterial flow of capital through the American capitalist system. It's very vital to the whole economy. But the darker side of Wall Street is that there is some nefarious self-dealing that goes on that people have to be cautious of. When I say the Madoff sons, what do you say?
I say a tragic story. I say they don't get let off the hook for not figuring it out, although nobody figured it out. And Andy, who I knew personally, was a person of honor, a person of integrity. And the tragedy is unfathomable, although I don't put it on the level of wiping out a middle-class guy.
So these are 2 words, same person, but they mean different things, I think, right? So Madoff.
I think Madoff is synonymous with basically the criminal fraud on Wall Street and able to pull this off over 40 years. He, again, was charismatic, brilliant in terms of what he done. He could have been a Bill Gates on Wall Street. So I get over that compartmentalized sociopathic mind.
I'm going to say the word Bernie. Isn't that different from the word Madoff?
Yeah, because Bernie, just the name Bernie came with trust. It came with credibility. It came with do not question me. And yeah, I see Madoff as the overall arching crime, and I see Bernie as the individual who pulled this off.
Yeah, it's this thing, and you mentioned it in the book, which is why I'm bringing up both of them. Let me ask you this question. This is in the same vein, and I want to get your reaction. The customer.
Yeah, the customer is a huge piece to me, and the customer was screwed in this throughout, and it's these innocent folks who were wiped out and devastated that just gets to my heart. And is what breaks you apart. And Wall Street really is founded on the customer. I have always admired Goldman Sachs, credo of putting the customer first, and they have to fight that conflict all the time. They screw it up a lot, but it was there, and Gus Levy was behind that, as you know. And so I'm a big fan of firms that genuinely put the customer first.
Yeah, well, the legendary Gus Levy, John Weinberg Sr.,
Yes.
You're a Greenwich guy, so you know these men. John L. Weinberg, they all put the customer first. I think the problem we have on Wall Street is that when the customer turns into a counterparty, Jim, when the firm looks like I'm going to pick the customer off. The Robin Hood story is an example of that. Once the customer looks like a counterparty, then things get really bad on Wall Street. And so it's something we always have to be
I'll add, they hide behind that. They'll say, well, we're a counterparty, we're a principal here. So it doesn't, we're taking the opposite side to help facilitate stuff. But that doesn't mean that you screw the customer.
Right, exactly. Last one, the Madoff documentary. Why should people watch that, Jim?
Well, first off, and it's a theme of my book too, is people think they know the Madoff story. No, they don't. Most of it is unknown because of all these other components I said. And Berlinger did a tremendous job taking a complex story. I thought they would simplify it, dumb it down, make it sexy, appealing. And it is, I'm amazed. I get this all the time. I get questions. People that listen to the issues and the data and the story so closely that they've retained it. And that's the credit I give them. It's a very sophisticated crime, very complex. And if you watch that, you'll get it.
Well, listen, this has been a fabulous experience for me. I appreciate you joining us on Open Book. The title of the book is Madoff Talks, Uncovering the Untold Story Behind the Most Notorious Ponzi Scheme in History. And it was written by James Campbell. He's a radio host and an author and a fascinating raconteur. I really enjoyed this, Jim. Thank you so much for joining us today.
And it was my honor to be there. You speak a lot of truth to power, so thank you for your time.